Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everyone on Zoom for joining. My name's Galen. I'm a research software engineer at CCV. I'm on the graphics, software, and data core, and I work on mostly web and mobile apps. And a lot of that involves UI UX design. Since at CCV we often work without a dedicated designer on projects, and so we end up doing a lot of our own design, whether that's fully custom or using component libraries and such. And so I wanted to give a talk on kind of an example workflow for how I approach designing UIs and user experience using Figma, and specifically from the perspective of someone who doesn't have professional training or like formal training in design. My expertise is more in programming and software engineering, but because we have to own the design as well as the implementation, I think it's useful to have some knowledge of the tools that exist, like Figma, to mock up these designs. And kind of my core thesis is that tools like Figma allow much more rapid iteration and more flexible iteration on design than, for instance, trying to write CSS at the same time as you're trying to come up with a visually pleasing and effective design. So yeah, this will be kind of part design tutorial slash discussion and part tutorial on just like the workings of Figma and how it works. There are a lot of really great Figma tutorials out there that'll cover a lot more detail than I can cover today. But I'm hoping that this kind of gives a introduction to the kinds of things that you're able to do in the tool. So yeah, as I said, the kind of motivation is that we in our role as software engineers at CCV, and I think a lot of people in research who are working with UIs have to do the design themselves and probably don't have the formal training in graphic design or UI design. Um, and Figma is a really effective, powerful tool for designing UIs. It has a lot of really powerful features, but it's also pretty accessible, easy to use, especially if you're somewhat familiar with this kind of tool, things like Photoshop, Illustrator. If you've used anything like that, a lot of those skills will transfer to Figma really easily. And I would actually say that Figma is a lot easier to use than a lot of those other tools. Um, and yeah, I mean, specifically, this is for those cases where you maybe have some requirements that require you to design custom design. So we often use component libraries or things that kind of pre-exist to give ourselves some constraints when we're building out UIs. That makes feature development a lot faster. And I usually reach for Figma when there's some requirement that asks us to design custom components or custom entire layouts or things like that. Um, Quick, just kind of poll, who here has used Figma before? Few people, sort of. Okay, most not. So that's good. Um, so yeah, so I think for today, I'm just kind of gonna go through a toy, but also kind of real world example of an app we might be developing, and then kind of my process for designing out the UI for that. And this is based on a current project that me and my colleague Rob are working on, and kind of an example, a dumbed down example of the kind of requirements we're dealing with that. So let's just imagine that we're building out a kind of data dashboard for an app that's going to display some data for a research lab at Brown or some other institution. And so the first thing we might do is gather some requirements for this dashboard page, and try to list out the kind of data that we need, the information and data we need to display to the user. So this is a really broad or a kind of basic overview of some of those requirements. So we have our actual data views, which could be tables, graphs, summary, statistics, things like that. We're not going to worry about that for today, and we're just going to focus on these other four requirements as kind of like a scaffolding around those data views. So we need a view of like the current user who's logged in. We need some tabs to navigate to different pages within the dashboard. Like maybe we have a main view, dashboard view, but then we also want to be able to view a list of files or a list of studies that we're looking at in this lab. We need a sign out and sign in button functionality. And then we also need some actions, specifically like a main action, like we're going to upload some new data or something like that. So yeah, we've got our basic requirements, and I think there's this kind of key difference between now that we've got those requirements, the backend design and the backend iteration and the front end iteration. So backend iteration, while there's all sorts of complexities and stuff, the kind of degrees of freedom, for lack of a better term, or the parameter space that we're working in when designing a backend API is fairly limited compared to a front end design. So this is like the general scheme of how it's going to work. We're going to have some database and a backend server that's going to be giving us our information on the user session. It's going to be fetching the data that we need to display. It's going to be giving us navigation information to tell us which tab we're on in the dashboard, that kind of thing. And then, there's all sorts of considerations that go into this, like what stack are we using, what technologies are we using, performance considerations, usability considerations. But the kind of the number of things and parameters that we have to think about and tune in that design are fairly limited. Whereas in front-end design, we have these requirements and we kind of have this blank page that we're imagining, and they're kind of free floating. Like we have an idea, okay, maybe our data views are going to go in the center of the page, and then we'll have these other requirements displayed around that. But then even once we figured out the basic layout, we have to think about all these other things. Like we have to think about hierarchy. What's the most important things? What are the second most important? What are the third most important? How do we differentiate? What colors are we going to use? Are we going to add any animations or transitions between elements? What kind of spacing system are we going to use? Typography, like all that stuff. And often we can just reach for a component library. We can reach for a design system that's already been created, and that'll give us a lot of guidelines for these kind of decisions. But in this case, where we're trying to design something pretty custom looking, it's really helpful to be able to iterate on all these things really quickly. And having a point and click tool like Figma is going to be super helpful for that. So yeah, so in terms of where we're going to go from here, we're going to first kind of go through how we might look for inspiration for this dashboard design out in the existing world of designs. Then we're going to do some very rough sketches and kind of iterate on a bunch of ideas for what our general design might look like, not worrying about any of these details, just looking at basic layout. We're then going to do some what's called wireframing in UI design, where we're going to just take the most basic content, put that in, not worry about styling at all. And then we're going to go in and focus on a couple elements and show how we can design those out to make them look ready for production in Figma. So yeah, so let's start by, if you have your laptop, you can follow along with this. We're going to start by just creating a Figma account. So yeah, if you go to figma.com, I'm going to be logged in. So let me quickly log out and go back to the main website. And then you can just click this Get Started for Free button. And it's going to, oops, it's going to take you to create an account. You can create one with your Google account, or you can create a new email and password. And it's then going to ask you about your plan tier. There is a free tier, which has all the functionality we're going to need today. There is also an education tier, which pretty much anyone at Brown should be able to access. They've recently made it a lot more stringent sorry, I'm just getting logged in here. Cool. So they recently made it a lot more stringent to sign up for that education plan. But if you have any kind of proof of like a syllabus or a class you're in or something like that, you can just provide that and they'll give you a free access to the full professional plan. But with just the free tier, you can get 3 projects and all the basic design tools that you'll need for designing UIs. So that's definitely a great way to start. And yeah, it's pretty easy to access the free educational plan as well if you are at Brown. Yeah, so let me first just get logged back in here and show kind of an example of what a final-ish design might look like um for this dashboard. So this is one of our current projects that we're working on, designing out a dashboard in Figma. And this is the kind of thing that Figma allows you to create. So it's basically just a static image with a bunch of components like buttons, links, images. You can create tables, and you're basically completely free with a blank canvas to just create boxes and texts and stuff. And you also can make reusable components, which we'll go into a bit later. So this is kind of the final product of what we're going towards today. We're going to be focusing mainly on just creating like a sidebar here, and using that as an example of all the different basic tools you can use in Figma. Figma also has, and we're probably not going to go into this today, but it also has a pretty powerful prototyping tool. So here I've set up a prototype where if I hit play there, it'll open an interactive window of this mockup. I can add hover effects. I can add links, so I can click on elements and navigate to other pages. And yeah, so that allows you to mock out user experience as well as the UI itself. Again, we're probably not going to go into that today. That's a fairly advanced feature. And I think for most projects, all you need is kind of a rough idea of what your UI is going to look like before actually implementing it, because it just takes too much time to try to mock out a whole prototype. But that's definitely an option. Great. Okay, so let's get started by has everyone been able to create an account? And so you should be on the home page, which you should see like a personal team here. Figma has this notion of teams. And you should have a team on the left sidebar. And then you can hit this plus button to create a new project. And you'll give it a name. And then in that project, it's going to give you an option to create a design file. So just hit that and it'll open up a file that looks a lot like this. So can people give me a thumbs up when they've been able to do that? Or raise your hand if you're having trouble. Cool. Okay. Yeah, and people on Zoom, if you wanna, you can just put something in the chat if you ever have questions, or raise your hand. I think I'll see that. And yeah, anyone here, if you have a question, just raise your hand and I can stop and address it. Great. Okay, so so we're going to start by just finding some inspiration. This is kind of the first thing that I usually do when I'm making a new design. So if you go up to this little drop down, this is pretty small. Sorry, I couldn't, for some reason, I couldn't expand my screen. But might be able to, yeah, here we go. Problem is that the Zoom key bindings work on the canvas, not the whole page. Okay, that should be a little easier to see. So there's this little drop down and that toggles whether you can see all your pages. So this is all one file, and then you can have multiple pages within a design file. So you should just like have one called page one. And if you just want to like call that mood board or something like that, we're just gonna like create a little mood board of kind of different ideas to kind of get a sense of what are the general layouts that people use for dashboards. So I often go to Pinterest for this. You can go to, there's a site called Dribble that has a lot of design inspiration and stuff, but and you don't have to follow along with this part necessarily, but basically Pinterest has a lot of great web design inspiration examples. So I'll often just go here. I just literally typed in a data dashboard and click on something I like, and just copy that image and go back to the design file and then just Command V to paste it in, and can do that with a couple of designs. I'm being pretty random right now, but normally I would spend a little more time looking through and finding specific ones that I like, maybe with kind of contrasting design ideas. But yeah, so Figma allows you to really easily just paste images in, and that allows you to have kind of your inspiration and your designs all in one place. So, and then what I want to do with these examples is kind of try to identify some of the basic layout components of a dashboard. So, and we kind of have our requirements in mind. We want to like have a user view, we want to have some tabs, we want to have an action button. And so we'll keep those in mind and kind of see where those are laid out in these different designs. So to zoom in Figma, you can either, if you're using a mouse, hold down Command and then scroll, or if you're using a laptop, just pinch to zoom like you would normally. To pan around, if you're using a laptop, just use 2 fingers and like so you can scroll around like this. And if you're using a mouse, this will also work with a trackpad. You can hold down space and then click and drag, and that'll pan the canvas around. This part of the screen, by the way, I call the canvas. So that's like where you're going to actually put your designs. This part is the layers view, and this just shows all the components that you have. You can select components like this, so you can see that it's cycling through and selecting those different images. And then over here, we have the attributes of each component, which I'll go into in a bit. Yeah, so in this first one, and kind of in all of these, we can already see some commonalities. We've got a sidebar with some navigation items. So immediately when we're thinking about tabs, we can start thinking about putting our tabs over here. We have got some user information over here. It's on the bottom left. Over here looks like it's on the top right. Sorry, that's a little grainy. And over here, it's also on the top right. So already we have a couple of options. In terms of actions, I don't immediately see any on this one. Yeah, these might be some bad examples for actions. But that'll give us some creative freedom to figure out where to put those. And yeah, so I think we've got an idea of having like a sidebar, a couple of places where we could put our user information. And it looks like this one has 2 layers of tabs. So it has tabs on the main data view, and then it also has tabs on the sidebar. But yeah, so the next step that I usually go into is to open up a new page. So if you toggle again this page view and you hit plus, you can create a new page. And then I'll just call this designs. You can call it mockups, whatever. It doesn't really matter how you split up your pages. I like to split them up between wireframes, sketches, designs, and stuff, but really doesn't matter because you have an infinite canvas here. It's never going to fill up. You can always add more. Great. Okay, so we're going to go to this design page and create our first sketch of a dashboard. So if you hit F on your keyboard, or you go up here and you select this kind of hashtag looking tool, that's called the frame tool. Frames in Figma are kind of like containers. They're going to be how you nest elements and layout elements in relation to one another. And they're kind of the building block for everything in a design. So as soon as you open up that tool, you'll then see that it gives you a bunch of options for predetermined sizes for frames. And these are going to kind of form the outer container for a given page of your design. So because we're designing a dashboard, we're going to choose a desktop size just because dashboards don't tend to work very well in terms of UI on mobile. And so we're just going to start by designing for desktop. So it doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to choose a MacBook 14-inch, which adds this frame to the canvas. So we can see that it has a preset width and height. I never worry about the X and Y coordinates since it's an infinite canvas and it's all just kind of relative. And yeah, we'll go into some of these other attributes in a bit. But when I'm sketching, I basically just draw gray rectangles to represent different elements. So if you hit R or select this rectangle tool, then you can start drawing out rectangles like this. So if you just like click and drag inside the frame, it'll draw those out. If you just click it'll create a 100 by 100 pixel rectangle. And it has this default gray color. If you go over here when the rectangle is selected, you can see the fill color here. So it's just kind of a light gray. And we don't need to worry about that for now since we're just sketching. So yeah, we talked about having a sidebar. So we can kind of represent that here. We have our like main data view here. But again, we're not going to go into any details with that. Then we have like a user image and name. So to represent that, I'm just going to use a circle and then a box. If you go up to this square tool and you hit the drop down, you can see you have all these options for other shapes. So we can choose ellipse, which you can also just hit O to use. And if we click, it'll just create a little circle and then hit R and drag out a rectangle next to that. This is going to be kind of our user image and name. So we saw one example of having that like over in the top right. By the way, to select multiple elements, you can hold down Shift and click 2 elements or more, and it'll just select them and group them so you can move them around together. So that's pretty useful. So yeah, in this first, we'll just have the user over here, and then we also wanted an action button. Maybe that will be over here, and then a sign in, sign out button. I'm going to put that over this sidebar. So to duplicate an element, I can hold down Option. That'll show this kind of double cursor. I can click and drag and then release, and that'll duplicate that. And I'm just going to type in black for the fill to make that visible over the sidebar. Are there any questions so far? So we just learned a bunch of new controls and stuff. So is anyone having trouble with any of those? Yeah, sure. Like the duplication kind of thing. Yeah, so the question was to go over the duplication control again. So if you hold down Option or Alt, if you're using a Windows computer, I think that's the name of the key, you'll see that it kind of creates these 2 cursors on your screen. And then if you click and drag, like you were going to move that element, it'll duplicate the element. And when you release, it'll paste that. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's super, super useful. I use that all the time. Yeah, okay, so now we've created one sketch, took us like 30 seconds, and we can now use that duplication control again to duplicate this whole frame by, you can go up to the name to select the whole frame and then just do that Option, click and drag to duplicate it. And now let's play around with some other ideas. So maybe we want to put the user over here, and maybe also the main action over here, and then we can kind of expand our data view over here. Yeah, at this point, you're basically just playing around with different ideas, and in reality, you'd probably try to play around with like at least 6 of these layout ideas, doing them really quickly, not caring what they look like beyond the layout. To just kind of get a sense of your options and then start to narrow down into what you like. But for the sake of time, I'm going to just focus on, I'm just going to do 2 of these sketches, and then let's just say that I like this sketch the most. So I like having kind of all these controls over in the sidebar and my main data views over here. So we're now going to move to what's called wireframing, which is where we start adding some actual content instead of just these kind of gray boxes. So if I duplicate this frame over here, and again, you can pan by holding space and clicking or just using your 2 fingers. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete all of these elements. And for now, I like to, when I'm doing this, kind of try to zoom in and focus on one part of the UI at a time, because it gets really overwhelming if you're trying to like fill in everything all at once. And it's really helpful to focus in on one thing. So yeah, we've got this blank canvas, and we've got this. Ooh, sorry. Oh no. Oh, that's the problem with an infinite canvas. You can get lost. I have never actually I've never yeah, I'm sure there is. But I've never had to do that. That's like that's maybe the first time I've ever gotten lost. That's funny. Yeah, I'm sure there is, but that's what a Google search is for, I guess. Um, yeah, so we've got this sketch as a reference. And we're just focusing on the sidebar for now. So, when I want to create a section in a UI in Figma, when you think section, think frame. That's kind of what you're going to be using as a container. Because a rectangle might work, except that you can't nest other elements within a rectangle. If you try to like draw over it, they just get placed side by side in the tree, and so it can be kind of hard to move them around together. And also, a frame is kind of like invisible by default. It doesn't have fill, it doesn't have a stroke or border or anything like that. So and a rectangle is actually under the hood like an SVG, like a vector graphic. So I use that for like individual elements, but not for groups of things. So yeah, because we're defining this section that's the sidebar, I'm just going to drag out a frame like that. So I'm going to hit F or select the frame tool, drag it out into roughly the right shape. And then just so we can see it over the white background, I'm going to go over here to the attributes of this frame and just click stroke, and that's going to automatically add a just basic black border. So now we can see it over the white. And then I'm just going to drag it into the corner until it shows those red guidelines to show that it's kind of snapped into place. And then I'm just going to roughly size it. We're going to worry about making the size correct in a little bit. Any questions so far about any of that? Frame. So yeah, so make sure you're selecting the frame tool. That's up here, or you can just hit F. Great. Okay. So now we're going to start adding content. So let's start with the user information. So we have some text. So if you hit T, that's going to open up your text tool, or you can just go up here, click the text button, and then you can double click on a text element to edit it. So I'm just going to type in my name. And then if I go over here to attributes, I can choose the font size, and I'm just going to scale it up to like 20. In web development, 16 is usually the default size of text. So 20 is like a slightly larger paragraph font size. Yeah, and then we had an image. So for images, for like mock images, I often use this website called Unsplash. Um, here's my user. I literally just searched user. And yeah, it gives you some, they're very high quality images. Unsplash, I'm sorry, yeah. What? It just has a bunch of images. Like it's basically like stock, whatever, stock yeah, but like more high quality. Some of them are bad. Like you can see this has that, but like this is a very high quality image of a high quality guy. So yeah, I'm just gonna, you can just go ahead, search user or whatever, dog, whatever you want your profile picture to be, copy that, and then paste it. Whoa. So yeah, so that's one thing, is that if I select this frame and I paste it in, it's gonna put the image in the frame. Yeah, it's great. I think we should stick with that. So I'm just gonna select away from the frame and then paste. It's obviously huge. So if I just did this and try to scale it this way, it's gonna freeform scale it and not preserve the aspect ratio. It'll preserve the aspect ratio of the image itself, but it's gonna kind of like change the width and height. So I'm gonna undo that and hit K, or go up here to where the cursor tool is, hit the drop down, and then choose the scale tool. And I'm just going to scale that down. It's going to preserve the aspect ratio. And I'll drag that over here. And then maybe I want to choose like a precise width and height. So I'm going to make sure that this little constrained properties kind of lock icon is selected. And then I'm gonna just type in like, let's say 96. I don't know, pretty arbitrary, but did anyone get lost in any of that? Good. Cool. Great. And then it's kind of a classic look to have rounded corners for a profile picture. So with the profile picture selected, I'm going to go over to, this is the border radius or corner radius attribute. And Figma doesn't have a notion of 100% border radius, which is how you do this in CSS for a fully rounded box. But if you just scale it up enough, like 1000 is kind of what I always use, it'll create a perfectly circular box. And yeah, so, and then I got to make sure that this image was actually put inside the frame. So if we go over here to the layers view, you can see that the image is not inside that frame. So I'm just going to click and drag, and then it'll kind of show where it's going to go, and I can just drag it in there so that now if I move this frame around, it's going to move all that content with it. Cool. And you can name these. So like I can name this sidebar so I can remember more easily what this is. But I don't find myself using the layers view a whole lot. I mostly just point and click. So I often am lazy and don't actually go through and rename everything, especially because things often change, and yeah. Great. Okay. Then we had some tabs, right? So I'm just going to add some more text for those. Double click into edit, and then use that duplication tool to duplicate those. Maybe we're going to have like a files page. These are all arbitrary. Maybe like a settings page or something like that. And yeah, so those are our tabs. And because we're just wireframing, I'm not going to care about alignment or anything like that. Just want to make sure that the content is all there. And then we wanted like an action button. If I want to select by clicking and dragging like I can out here inside a frame, if I just try to click and drag, it'll move the frame. But if I hold down Command and click and drag, it'll just like select. It'll know that you're just trying to select. So I'm going to move those down. And then again, just add some text for like an action. And this is going to be a button, but for now it's just text, like upload file. And yeah, for the sake of time, I think I'm going to kind of move on to the next bit, which is designing out more of the look and feel. But you can imagine doing this kind of just filling in content for all your buttons, all your links, all your things like that, just to get an idea of, yeah, the raw content, not worrying about layout, not worrying about styling. But the real fun of Figma comes when you're actually designing the look and feel of UI elements. So let's design a button. So we've got this upload file action. I'm going to zoom way in so I can see it more easily. And so the first thing is that this is just text right now. And buttons usually have like a box around them. So I'm going to add a frame around this text. To do that, I can right click and do select frame selection. I can also do Command Option G or probably Control Alt G on Windows. So now we can see that we have this frame. Can rename this button. And so we have a text element within a frame. It didn't change the look because, again, frames are invisible by default. But yeah, let's first add a background to this button. So with the frame of the button selected, I'm going to go over to the attributes, and I'm going to select fill. If I click fill, it'll add a white background at first. But let's make this just a black background. Obviously, that's going to hide the text. So I can go to the text, and I can change that to white so we can see it. And I mean, in reality, in most designs, you don't want to use just plain old black and plain old white. It actually can make it less readable. But for now, we're not going to go into color theory or anything. So we'll just stay with plain old black and white. And okay, the like padding around this is obviously really, really tight. And most buttons have some padding around the inner element. So we're gonna use this pretty powerful feature of Figma called auto layout. If you've ever used CSS and you know about Flexbox, It's pretty much an exact copy of that layout scheme, but if you don't, no worries. It's pretty intuitive. If we go over, basically, if you're on a frame, you can add an auto layout to it. If we go over to attributes and we click auto layout, that's going to add a default layout. For now, it didn't change anything, but I'll go through these attributes just to explain what they do. So this will change in which direction the elements within the frame are laid out. So right now it's horizontal. So if I select this text and I duplicate it over, it's going to lay it out in a horizontal line inside the frame. If I select the frame again and I choose the down option, it's going to lay them out vertically. And if I choose wrap, then it's basically just going to try to lay them out horizontally, but if the containing frame gets too narrow, it's going to wrap them into a vertical line. For this, we're not adding any extra elements, so it doesn't really matter which direction it's laid out. So I'll just lay it out horizontally. When a frame has an auto layout, then we can choose to set the width to either a fixed width where we can give the exact pixel value of the width, or we can choose this hug contents, which basically means that the frame is going to squeeze until it hits the contents. So we're going to choose that because we kind of want the button to scale its width with the width of the text. Next, we're going to add some padding. So if we go, padding is like the space inside a container that is added around the contents. So if we select the button frame, we can add some horizontal padding here, and we can add some vertical padding. So I'm going to choose pretty arbitrary values of like 12 and 8, maybe. So that's already looking a lot nicer. I'm going to add some border radius. Again, a pretty arbitrary value, but like 8 to 12 is usually what you find on websites. Yeah, and then already like that's looking a lot more like a button. We can do some more fancy things, like we could add a drop shadow like that. This allows you to add all sorts of effects and stuff, but we won't go into that. Great, so we've got a button. I'm also going to add an auto layout to this user kind of information frame. Sorry, it's got displaced. So if I select these two again, and I can actually just add an auto layout directly to a collection of items instead of having to create a frame first. So I can just click auto layout again. And then here, because we have two elements, it does matter which direction the auto layout works in. Obviously, we want it horizontal. And then I can choose the amount of spacing between the elements. This looks pretty good, 30 works. I can also choose how the elements are aligned. So if I go like this, they'll be aligned in the upper right corner of the container. Align center is the center horizontally and vertically. And then, yeah, this kind of is pretty self-explanatory. But in this case, I think we just want it perfectly centered. And yeah, so those are both looking a lot better. We can also add an auto layout to the tabs. So we can click this again, or we can do Shift A, also adds an auto layout. And yeah, we'll just, again, 42 seems pretty good, but maybe we want to scale it up a little bit. So we'll add the gap 48. And yeah, we don't need to worry about padding or anything like that. We can also add an auto layout to the whole sidebar because we want that to be laid out in this is obviously the spacing is pretty rough. So we'll select the sidebar, click auto layout, and you can see that it automatically set hug contents on the height so that now the sidebar is too short. So we can change that to fixed height and just scale it back up to the full height of the screen again. And let's say we want these centered in the sidebar. So we'll do this, but we want it also aligned to the top of the sidebar. And then again, we want a fixed width, and we'll just scale this down. Or alternatively, we could do hug contents, and then we could just set some kind of horizontal padding and vertical padding like, I don't know, something like that. So that it'll scale to the width of the contents, but it's a lot more narrow than before. Yeah, and maybe also this vertical spacing is too much. We can change it here directly. You can also just hover over this pink thing and just scale it up or down. Great. Yeah. So I mean, this is obviously with the amount of time we've had, not this is not like a fully fleshed out design or anything, but this hopefully gives you an idea of some of the tools that you can use to start building up a design. The last thing I want to show is components. So often you're going to find yourself reusing elements a lot in your design. That's the same for actual web development, but even within just like a static design file, you're going to be reusing a lot of components. So a button is a great example of that. If we select our button and then hit Command Option K, or right click and where is it? Sorry, undo that, and then click Create Component. That's going to make this instance of the button a component. And then if we then duplicate it to another part of the file, and we go ahead and change the contents or change the styling at all, it'll update that everywhere. We can also find all of our components in the Assets tab over in the Layers menu. If we select that and open up that, we can see that we have the button component there. We can click and drag and drop it into our canvas. Yeah, I think I'll probably end there. There are a lot of features we didn't get to look at, such as with components, you can have multiple variants of a component. So if you had multiple different kinds of buttons, you can create variants of a button and then be able to quickly switch those in and out for each other. And you can also define global styles like colors so that you can quickly select a color for something. Like right now, we have to manually go in and change the hex value, or you can go in here and edit the color this way. But in most designs, you're going to want preset colors to choose from, so you can do that. Again, there's some really great tutorials on the web, on YouTube. So I encourage you to check those out if you're interested in learning more. But yeah, I would love to field any questions if folks have any, or confusions, but also love to hear about things that people are working on or have worked on or will work on that they think this would be useful for, not useful for. Yeah. Yeah, August.
That's really cool.
Okay. Yeah, also people on Zoom, can you hear, did you just hear August's question, or? Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, ask your question, I'll just repeat it.
I guess one, our, as a knowledge design, so you talked about color,
Mm.
that sort of works incorporated into Figma for ease of use. Like, we were like, oh, it's pretty standard.
Mm.
And I mean, you changed the circular border. Is Figma like, okay, like you with it, or like, are there sort of some sort of preset guidelines that you can like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is basically, yeah, the question is basically, you know, are there ways to kind of give yourself more constraints and more guidelines in the choices you're making in terms of design in Figma? Or is it kind of just like do whatever the heck you want? Like the specific example of making this image circular, like how would you know to do that? I think the short answer is that it's definitely a tool that's built for designers, and so it gives you all the freedom that you kind of would need to make any kind of design. There is a really rich kind of community side of Figma. So I think this is available on the free version, but there's a little, I don't know, speaking of UI design, I don't know why they put it all the way down here because I'm always like forgetting where it is. and then like searching for it up here and it's not there. Anyway, you can explore community, and then this is a little bit like looking up on Pinterest, except that you can import files and components directly from other Figma projects. So like, I mean, there are tons of like, oops, component libraries. Um, uh, and so like people make things like this, and then I can just go and open their file in Figma, and they have colors and all sorts of really complicated stuff. But for instance, like an image, like they just have the different options for rounded images and stuff. And so you can copy and paste this stuff. You can also like create a fork, create your own copy of this file in your own library, and then import. Another thing I didn't go over is like component libraries, being able to share components between files, which you do here, and you can basically add. Like I have all these component libraries from my other projects that I could add to this file if I wanted to. So there are ways to like import kind of some presets. But I think, yeah, I mean, there are resources that I found really useful for just having a basic sensibility about design. Like there's a book called Refactoring UI that some of us have read at CCV, and I found really, really useful in just kind of understanding the most basic, like how to use color, how to use typography, that kind of thing. It didn't require a ton of time, but then once you have a fundamental sensibility for those things, it makes it a lot easier to just like know what's wrong with the design and kind of tweak things. But yeah, I mean, Figma definitely doesn't solve that fundamental problem of like if you just have no idea where to go. But I think kind of part of my hope is that showing this process shows a little bit of the kind of process of going from having no idea what you're going to make, and then finding some inspiration, and then identifying the components, and kind of slowly scaling up in complexity. Yeah. Oh.
Well, I guess it is really, I mean, I don't know if you can answer this, but it's like, but also, I mean, as you were going through this, it's kind of like all of you guys are like research software. So is there somebody who super design background?
Yeah, I can't answer. The question is, are we at CCV, are we planning on bringing anyone in has more design?
On
Uh,
certain projects, we have had designers work specifically on certain projects, but it kind of depends on funding, from what I've heard, right, Paul?
Yes, that is accurate.
Yeah. Heather just said, I'm communicating back and forth. Heather just said that on some projects we have had designers come in from outside, but it just depends on funding and kind of the requirements of the project. Yeah, perfect.
Wondering, like, can you export that into the PHP?
That's a great question. So there are ways of, so the question is how do you export this stuff? Can you export it to CSS? Can you export it to different HTML formats? So first of all, there's a large community of plugins as well from the community. You can search for plugins up here. And so some of those will allow you to export to like, I know there's like Chakra UI, you can export directly to that. But the most basic stuff that I use all the time is, and I don't think this is available on the free tier actually, but there's this switch where you can go to dev mode, and then if you select something, it will show you all the CSS that you need for it, and it'll kind of give you this is what the developer tools in most browsers would show. Yeah, and then you can like export it to Tailwind or React or HTML or yeah, and then you can also get more code gen plugins. So I think yeah, that's something that people use all the time. Yeah. I mean, I've never done it actually, so I don't know. There's probably some code cleanup you have to do, and like, I don't know. I mean, yeah. But you can also export things as PDFs, PNGs, whatever. If you just go down, if you select a frame and then you hit export, you can choose the format. And yeah, you can change like what it's called, and so that's also very useful. That kind of ties into Heather's question, which is, have I ever used this for things other than web projects? I use it for like everything. I use it for uh like presentation slides. I've used it in the past for resumes. Yeah, it's like a very powerful when you get the hang of it. It's like very powerful for graphic design of all sorts.
Let's say question.
Yeah.
I assume you should be able to like create a template and add text.
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Create a template and add text later, but it's like HTML or something.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's just HTML, you can edit it however you want. But... Cool. Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's basically just like, I mean, actually, when you go to the frame tool, I told you it gives you all these preset sizes. It gives you like a slide presentation size, so you can like use that and fill it in. I guess you can also make papers. Yeah, I mean, that's like what I would use for like resume or something like that. Yeah. Build a research paper in Figma, that would be a bit overkill, but
Won't be like bringing in stuff.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Great. Thanks for joining everyone on Zoom. That's it.